Hey everybody, it's Greg, Detroit's Love Guru, coming to you live with the Art of Relationship show. We got a dynamic show. I am going to be introducing Brian Miller. He is a TEDx expert, speaker, teaches speaking, just a dynamic individual. He was a magician as well. So it's going to be an interesting show as we talk about isolation, fighting isolation during COVID. And what are you going to do about it? And some tips and pointers. So pay attention. It's going to be a great show. Hey, welcome back, everybody. I'm going to be bringing Brian right on. Here's Brian, and I'm going to let you introduce yourself, Brian, and I appreciate you being on the show. It's going to be fun. It's going to be dynamic. Talking about isolation and loneliness big time during the pandemic, and how many people are at their wits' end, pulling their hair out. Well, I have no hair. So looking at those dynamics as far as what are you doing to break that isolation so you don't drive yourself nuts and crazy, and it makes it worse, puts you down in that depressive state, as many people know. Okay, so Brian, I want you to take it away, introduce yourself. I appreciate you being here, man.
Hey, I appreciate it, Greg. Thanks so much for having me. And by the way, I think between the two of us, we have the average amount of hair. So I broke the mold there for us.
Don't make me jealous now. No.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm guessing a lot of people are wondering right now why you have a magician on to talk about loneliness and isolation. Or maybe people are thinking, yeah, that makes sense. If he's a magician, he would be talking about loneliness and isolation. The thing is, I was a magician for 10 years. I did that full time. Started out doing little backyard barbecues for $20 a pop and managed to build my career to touring internationally. And, really, I got really lucky, made a couple of smart moves, worked really hard, and got very lucky. And so many magicians, comedians, aspiring artists don't ever get to do what I did, and I did it and enjoyed it. And then I gave a TEDx talk in 2015 called How to Magically Connect with Anyone, where I shared with audiences how magicians learn to take on perspectives that are different from our own to bridge the gap with any audience anywhere in the world and create magic, create a shared experience for them in spite of the antagonistic relationship of I know something you don't know. And if magicians can do it, anybody can do it. And so in this tiny little TEDx talk in a local high school, there was no pomp and circumstance. I just shared a little bit about that, a little bit about perspective taking, and it went viral, 3.3 million views or whatever. Yeah. It was one of the first, it wasn't one of the first, but it was one of the most viral TEDx talks of all time for a while there. And so I started getting invited to speak on perspective understanding and became a human connection specialist. And that's what I've been doing for the last 6 years, is speaking, writing, presenting, facilitating workshops for organizations and educators who want to build environments where everyone feels heard, understood, and valued. And so that's who I am, where I came from, and what I do.
You almost took my tagline, Brian, when I said about, I want you to feel, at least if you disagree, you feel heard, understood, and respected. Yeah. I always say in Greg's fantasy land, I also like you to feel liked, but it depends on what you disagree on, right? So with Brian's human connection experience, this is going to be dynamic as far as helping people break out of that loneliness and isolation. And we know, your tips and insights, Brian, as far as, like we're doing right now, the video chat, there's, FaceTime, but I have the better phone, the Android. So no, I'm joking around. But
do I. I'm with you. We just turned off half of the audience, but the rest of you are still here.
Well, I'm going to say I'm going to say 3/4 of the people are going to leave now. iPhone users.
It's okay. They're off on Clubhouse anyway.
Oh, you know what? So we they got to bring that over to us. Yeah. But anyways,
seriously,
to bridge that gap, and how do you feel connected, even through video, through the phone? And we'll get into some tips and dynamics about that, and about that human connection, about how do you make each other feel connected, understood, heard, valued is a big
Yeah.
tip I go after as well, right? As far as, and now you're not seeing anybody, you're isolated. Maybe you live alone, or maybe you live, working with couples and everything, and you have the kids doing virtual learning. You want to be isolated because everybody's stepping over each other's toes and feet, and the negative energies are just vibing during the pandemic. So what are your tips, Brian, as far as what you tell people, your listeners, to break that isolation, that loneliness, when maybe you're isolated for 14 days because you got COVID, or family members or somebody else? What are your tips?
Yeah, and it's a great question. I love the way that you framed that too, around maybe you're isolated for 14 days, and this is where the same word can be used in many different ways. And part of me, this is my academic background is in philosophy. That's what I studied. And so when people used to say, "Oh, you got a philosophy degree? What are you doing with that?" I'd be like, "I'm a professional magician." But the truth is,
Love it, right?
the truth is, what philosophy does for you is it teaches you, if nothing else, that definitions, words, they matter. They really matter. It's not just semantics, it's all semantics. Semantics is the study of meaning, and if we don't get our words right, if we don't agree to how we're using words in different contexts, then we get into all kinds of misunderstandings. So you use the term isolation to talk about somebody who might have to maybe quarantine for 14 days. I want to back up on that and say, have you ever been at a party? Remember, can you imagine being at a party anymore? But remember being at a party and there's just people everywhere, shoulder to shoulder, but maybe you don't know anybody there. Have you ever had the experience of feeling lonely even though you're surrounded by people? Right? And of course you have. Everybody's had that experience at some point. There's people everywhere, and yet I feel alone. So what we know is that feeling connected doesn't necessarily mean that there's people physically around you, because you can be around people and feel alone. So there's a few things that we need to recognize. The first is that in February of 2020, Cigna updated their landmark study on loneliness in America. It first came out in 2018, which anybody in our field knows this study. It was monumental. And they updated it in February 2020. And at that point, 61% of Americans, 61% feel lonely or isolated on a regular basis.
Yes.
February of 2020, that was pre-COVID. That's what's really important about that. And that in and of itself was up 7% from the original study, and it's only gotten worse since then. Now, there's a few things about loneliness that we need to talk about before we can talk about potential solutions. First, the impact on your health, right? Loneliness has the same mortality rate as smoking 15 cigarettes per day or being medically obese. The same impact on mortality, lonely. 50% increased risk of dementia, depression, anxiety, suicide, right? It's not like, when you say lonely, people go, "Oh, are you lonely?" It feels easy to rib somebody, kind of joke about, but it's really serious. And then for the business folks out there, for the leaders, the executives, the managers, it's really bad. You might not think loneliness like, "Oh, that's just people's personal lives. It doesn't affect us here." Actually, it does. People who are lonely are less productive. They're less engaged. They have lower retention rates. They're twice as likely to miss work on account of illness. They're 5 times as likely to miss work on account of stress. And they think about quitting their jobs twice as often as people who don't report being lonely, which means you have a real problem if you've got people at work who are lonely, and it's 61% of them, right? It's almost 2/3 of them. So this is not only a problem for people's personal lives, for their health, it's a problem for business. It just goes through everything. And so Cigna originally proposed a solution. And the solution was people who report the lowest levels of loneliness have frequent, meaningful, in-person interactions.
Yes.
Frequent, meaningful in-person interactions. And for years I talked about that. That was the core of all of my speeches and workshops. How do we get frequent, meaningful in-person interactions into our lives? And then COVID hit and in-person disappeared. And so what I've been doing for the last year is I've been working with people to double down on frequent and meaningful. And meaningful is the key one, because I think we forget how much we treat people as transactions instead of treating them as people.
You know what?
And so that's where I would start.
And Brian, that's awesome. And the big key word is the meaningful, like you talked about, that connection piece. Because if it's not meaningful, I mean, we pass around, even with couples, talking about, or people, how many people, oh, how are you? Oh, I'm fine. And they don't even hear I'm fine, right? It's like
white noise.
Do you really care? Are you asking me just for lip service, or do you actually want to connect with me and care about that? And I take, even, I eat, breakfast every day like everybody. I stop at a local family restaurant type thing. And, you hold the door for somebody, or, how are you doing? And no, how are you doing? Don't give me just lip service type of action, but that meaningful, even a meaningful smile with somebody can just, light up their world, can make them put a smile on their face. Like, you know what, you're actually paying attention to me. And this goes with the communication aspects that Brian was talking about. And, are you actually listening to what you're saying? And we can look at, this cuts across all relationships, the workplace, definitely, romantic relationships, family relationships, parent-child relationships. How many parents out there actually are listening, paying attention to what their kids are saying? That doesn't mean you have to believe them or agree, but are you actually listening to them? Not only the words that are used, are you looking for the nonverbals, the eye movements, the eye rolls, they're bored, or, oh my God, they're feeling like they're being lectured. And how many people get upset by that? How many people start yelling at their kids, their partners, their spouses, coworkers, that they're eye rolling? And why are you rolling your eyes? Oh, I feel like I'm being lectured to. Now, what would you do with that, right? Where would you go with those dynamics and meet that connection? And are you getting your point across, or are you just blowing smoke up someone's booty, or that's what they feel like? So that is a huge dynamic. And you touched on that, Brian, about the meaning. It is so huge.
Yeah. And there was something you said that was really important there, Greg, which was, you said, I might not necessarily agree with you. Oh, yeah, you might not necessarily agree. In fact, you're not going to agree with many people much of the time. That's what makes life so interesting and what makes relationships so exciting, whether they're personal or professional, is that you're not going to agree with people because we have different individual unique perspectives and backgrounds and cultures, religions, ideologies, all these different ways of moving through and seeing the world. But the critical thing for me is that human connection is not about agreement. It's about understanding. Connection is about understanding. If you can reach a shared place where you can look somebody eye and say, I hear you, I see you, and I'm here for you, even if we don't always agree, that's where real connection begins. That's where real relationships are formed.
And let's face it, how much of a different place would this world be, right? Instead of that right or wrong, you turn that dynamic, right or wrong, tit for tat, back and forth, instead of understanding. I get you. And I talk about this all the time about, what, I accept you. And, when I worked for Chrysler years and years ago, what, it's, I do accept you. I accept you for who you are. That doesn't mean I have to agree with you. That doesn't mean I want to connect with you or live that lifestyle, right? So
you don't even have to like them.
No?
You don't have to invite them over to dinner. You don't have to connect with them on Facebook. You don't have to do any of those things. It's simply a recognition that somebody's got a different way of moving through the world than you. And what we're not talking about, and I always have to clarify, because in the last year or two, things have been really divisive, especially in America, but many places in the world.
Yes.
It doesn't mean that you have to support somebody who has hateful views. You definitely don't.
No.
But what you really ought to do is at least try to understand where those hateful views are coming from. But if you can't understand where those hateful views are coming from, you can't have a conversation about it with them or with anybody. You can't make things better. You can't do anything if you don't actually understand. If all you do is go, you're different than me and I'm out. That doesn't get you anywhere.
No.
Anywhere in public or in private.
There is a Amanda listening in, mention about, song lyrics, kids listen to. And it's funny how many people, what makes you connect to a certain song? Is it the words? Is it the lyrics? Is it the music behind it? That you really relate to. And it's ironic how many people actually try to relate to one another in that same manner. Maybe not that dramatic. And we know we're all busy. It's not going to be perfect 24/7. But I look at, yeah, you love this song. It brings tears to your eyes. It makes you want to dance and happy, all this stuff, or reminds you of maybe a loved one that passed away. And what made you connect with that person? What did they do to make you feel connected to them? And it's ironic how you, what are you doing to connect with that, especially during COVID? And can you make someone connect? Let's face it, like Brian is now with his fantastic voice that I want to steal. But you look at, he's got that professional radio voice and my squeaky old voice, whatever, going through puberty all the time. It's not as crisp, right? I own it. But what do you do to connect, even if you don't see people, even if you're not, face to face? Are you able to connect with even, say, eye contact, even through the camera? It's ironic. Even you have great media personality, right? We could talk about, well, Jay Leno, that might be sort of Jimmy Fallon. Let's go with him, right? That they connect with the audience and the people through that eye contact, right? Yeah. They sort of relate. You can almost, in their eyes, you can feel the words that they're saying with meaning, with that connection. They really want to connect, and they're speaking to you directly, even though they're speaking to the camera, right? So what are tips that you would suggest, Brian, that you recommend to your clients, your people, as far as connecting, even through the video mechanisms that we're forced to use now?
No, this is a really good question. So let me do a few, because we've kind of done mindset now, which you always have to get right first. But it's not only mindset. I think there's too many coaches and gurus out there that are like, everything is mindset. No, mindset you have to be in to begin with, but then the techniques matter. The strategies still matter. You can't mindset your way into everything. So now we've got the mindset right, which is essentially human connection is a gift. It's a gift you give to other people in an age where everybody feels alone, distracted, isolated. So this is first, which means that if you feel that way, if you've ever wished, I wish somebody would reach out to me, there's a lot of people that are wishing the same thing. So you get to be this person now. Instead of waiting for them to come to you, be the person who gives the gift. So that's our mindset. Next, you mentioned eye contact. This is so interesting. You've discovered this. I've discovered this. I'm guessing many people watching, listening to this right now have discovered this in their own way over the last year. The biggest problem with eye contact virtually is the camera is not the same place as the screen. Your face is on the screen. Now watch what happens. I hope everybody who's watching this and not just listening is going to love this. Ready? So, nobody even noticed that I'm really good at doing this because I do this for a living. Don't feel bad if you're not good at this. But watch what happens when I actually look at the screen. Greg, this is the first time I can see you the entire conversation. I didn't even know you had a red shirt on, okay? But the second I look back at the camera, you immediately, and anybody watching, listening to this feels connected with me immediately, because this, for some reason, the eye contact virtually makes it feel it makes it feel like I'm just here for you. And the key to doing this kind of connection when there's many people watching, especially, this isn't even a Zoom call, I can't even see the faces on the screen. If you're watching this and you feel connected with me, if you feel like this is somehow personal for you, the reason is it is personal for you because you're sitting by yourself watching this. And I know that you're sitting by yourself watching this, which means I'm in my head, I'm not speaking to 20 people, 200, 2,000 people, whoever's out there right now. I'm speaking to one person times 20, one person times 200, one person times 2,000, whoever it is. And that's what great broadcasters of the traditional media did. And I learned this lesson because on my podcast on Beyond Networking, I had on Jay Reynolds a couple of seasons ago, and he is the voice of ESPN SportsCenter Radio. Yes. And he lives right here in town, and I used to teach his kid magic lessons, and we're good friends. And I got him to come over, and he is this, like, literally millions of people worldwide know his voice, but have no idea what he looks like, because for 20 years he's been the voice of ESPN SportsCenter Radio. And I had him right here in the studio, sitting on that couch, and I said, Jay, how do you connect with people? You can't see them. You can't hear them. You're sitting in a studio by yourself. And he said, I just imagine the person who's driving at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m., trying to get to wherever they're going, listening to this. I just imagine trying to delight them, trying to have a one-on-one conversation with that person. And so that's the secret to doing it in the format we're doing right now. But when you're doing it one-on-one, when you're trying to connect with somebody personally, so like there's 2 levels happening right now, Greg, yes. Right? So you and I are having a connection, a conversation.
Absolutely.
And we are having a conversation with the audience. There's 2 different things. Yes. And I have to be mindful of both, right? Like right now, I'm feeling like I've talked just about long enough where it's time for me to hand it back over to you, even though I have another point. So my brain is going, how do I hand this back over so you can toss it back to me? We're playing catch for the audience right
Absolutely. Now. And this is just like you look at a regular conversation and how many people you talked about mindful, Brian, and it's looking at, and I love that camera aspect, and it's funny. And this analogy too, how many people, and I hate getting my picture taken, okay? The glare off my forehead and all that stuff, right? Let's face it. So you look at, bounces back, the camera person gets blinded and stuff, right? With the flash. But when you take a picture and someone tells you, or a professional photographer or hobbyist, whatever, what do they tell you? They tell you to look at the camera, right? Don't look at me, look at the camera. So Brian, you mentioned that it's crucial, especially with, you want to pay attention, what's going on, looking at the screen, and you think you're talking, but the other person, are you even looking at me? Because you're not looking at that camera. That is crucial. Okay. So you look at, the communication, the connection Brian and myself, are having or trying to have, and then the audience. One thing too about meaningful conversation is, one thing about me, I'm very genuine, very authentic. I'm very real. My clients know it, people that know me. I know a lot of people all over the place. I'm flattered by that. And they know I actually care about what you think, what you feel. And that is a message that, even connecting and people connecting with you, how many people, even virtual, that they're so busy, they're not even listening. We tripping over my tongue as usual, that we touched on that at the beginning of the show, that how many people are actually listening? Even, we're doing all this here and here, talking virtually on your phone, doing, all this stuff while you're trying to have a communication episode, if you will, or a connection through virtual means, that you're on your phone, you're checking this, kids are all busy, and we know that, right? But how many people are actually paying, I don't have to worry about the connection. I don't have to worry because I'm virtual. They can't see this anyways.
Right.
How many people are actually paying attention to that connection, that, you actually care what that other person has to say, be it, a best friend of yours in another state, another country, next door because of COVID, who cares, right? Your kids, grandkids, it goes all across the board, business relationships as well, that you actually care what they're going through. And it's not just lip service, right? It's not just in one near out the other. So that when you're talking about, Brian mentioned at the beginning about meaningful connection, that's what I'm talking about, that and maybe, I don't know if that's what makes me good at what I do, I don't know, but I actually care about my clients. I care about the people I serve, and I actually, what they go through, what they feel, that matters to me. And the more you implement that to the communication aspects, especially the loneliness and isolation, you have to remember, maybe you're lonely. Maybe, I'm using the word isolated. Let's go with loneliness. Okay. That you're lonely. And even, Brian mentioned this, and I love that. You could be in a room with 5,000 people and feel alone. Couples, I ask people all the time, would you rather feel lonely and be alone, or would you rather be in a relationship and feel lonely? And again, it's not a right or wrong answer, but it's an answer that needs to be addressed. And how many people want to tell their, I'm lonely, I'm lonely, I'm lonely. But the person you're talking to, what if they're lonely too? Do you ask? Is it all about you, or are you inquiring about what that person is also going through too? And we look around us. We have people, maybe you're one of them, look in the mirror, that maybe you're one of them, that it's all about you and what you think, what you feel, what you're going through on a daily basis. But are you also asking that person what they're going through? And in your experience, Brian, as I hand it back over to you, how can you relate to that?
Yeah. For the last year, I remember at the beginning of COVID, for the first few months, every single conversation was exactly the same, whether it was on Zoom or on the phone. You get on with somebody and you say, "How are you?" And they go, "Hanging in there." It was the exact same conversation every time. And what I started doing is I'd say, "How are you?" And they'd say, I'm good. They do that thing. And I started doing this every time. I go, "That's awesome. How are you really?" And you would watch people immediately become a real person again. They would immediately, because nobody had expressed any interest in how they were actually doing in months, right? It would be a stranger. It could be a prospect. Somebody just called me interested in maybe having me come do some event for their company, a keynote, a workshop, whatever. We've never met from anybody. We have no pre-existing relationship apart from they've seen my TED Talk or whatever. And I get on the phone and they'd say, "Hi, it's Amy. I'm from this and such company and whatever. We're interested in maybe having you do a thing." And I'd say, "Hey, Amy, it's so nice to meet you. How you doing?" And she'd, "Oh, no, I'm good. I'm good. It's weird, but I'm good." And I'd say, "That's great. How are you really?" And all of a sudden, this woman, Amy, this generic woman I'm talking about now, this woman, Amy, who's never had a real conversation with me in her life, would instantly start telling me all the things that have happened in the past few weeks. My grandmother passed, and then we couldn't have a funeral, and then this happened, and the kids are driving me crazy, but I'm trying to help them, and it's like, that just tells you I'm basically a stranger, and if they're willing to give that kind of information, how desperate are people for connection, for a real conversation, for something that's not just white noise? You mentioned like 15 minutes ago, and I didn't want to interrupt you. You mentioned, you say to somebody, "How are you?" and they just kind of go, "I'm fine," or whatever. Have you ever asked the wrong question and gotten the right answer? Have you ever said like, "Oh, what time is it?" and they go, "I'm fine, thanks," and you just both move on with your lives because it didn't matter.
That wasn't the point, right? That robotic mechanical conditional response, and it's ironic how many people. And you look at, I love how you mentioned that, Brian. That people they become that real person, and you actually see. I see it on a daily basis. They said, "Oh, I'm fine." And they're saying the words, but their body posture, their eyes are telling you they're not fine. And it's funny when you know what. Quit bullshitting me. I know what's going on. Talk to me. I actually care. And they just melt. Like Brian said about becoming a real person, and they just melt and they feel safe. And it's ironic how many times, a lot of times, I bet you over 1,000 times over the years I've been doing this, that people get upset, one partner or the other, that within 5-10 minutes they tell me something that they've been holding on to for 20 years, 10 years, 15 years, 30, whatever. And the other person, their partner, gets so pissed off. They get so upset. "Oh my God, how can you, this perfect stranger, and you're telling them, how come you couldn't tell me?" And I said, "That's a good question. What are you doing to make it safe that you can talk about anything?" And, even if you don't, like you said, we might not agree on everything, but what do you do to make it safe to hear something that might not be so pleasant, that might, let's face it, hurt our feelings, piss us off, that type of aspect? Are you able to handle it and care what that other person is saying? Or do you get defensive? Once you get defensive, you don't even have to say a word. Your eyes will tell you that. Where does that meaningful conversation go, Brian? Right? Where does that just end, or does it progress?
Yeah. So this is, I'm going to tell you a personal story now. This is a story that I don't think I've ever actually told on an interview. It's in my book, so I know I'm allowed to tell it because my wife already gave me permission to write it into my book, which means I have
That's
permission
important.
to tell it. But I don't think I've ever actually, because usually I'm on business podcasts and stuff like that.
Right.
So here's a personal story that I hopefully will help drive this point home. My wife and I have had really one significant fight in our entire relationship, and it was very early. It was in the first 3 or 4 months of our relationship.
What'd you do, Brian?
Exactly. That's exactly right. So this is exactly what happened. Is she kind of exploded at me one day and she's a quiet person. She's not like that. She kind of exploded because I had interrupted her, and I didn't even know what she was talking about. And I said, that's what I said. I said, "What are you talking about?" She goes, "You're always like, you talk over me, like you stop, like you interrupt me, you whatever." And I immediately got defensive, right? Because what first happens is in that moment, we started to talk about it, and we realized that we were coming at it from completely different perspectives, and that I'm from an Italian family. I'm sure you can tell. I'm from an Italian family on Long Island. Long Island Italian. Half my family Long Island Italian. Half my family Long Island Jewish. So fully neurotic, both sides.
Neurotic, obnoxious.
That's right.
Loud.
That's right.
I'm being
so we're loud. No, seriously though. But so what happens at a family dinner in an Italian family is that it's just a shouting match to see who can talk over. And I didn't think anything of it. That's how my family is. We all just yell over each other. Totally normal. And when somebody says something that gets you excited, it's almost like a compliment to like jump in and tag off their point, because it got me excited what you just said. I want to continue that thread. And so she said, being an introvert, and I'm not right. I'm a classic extrovert. She's a classic introvert. And she said, here's the thing.
You know that if you
was that the YouTube delay? I've done that before.
No, it's my fault. Yeah.
No worries. So it's fun. It was just funny that you interrupted me as I was talking about interrupting. So I
apology.
So she told me, as an introvert, she really picks and chooses when she wants to say something. She doesn't do what I do, which is I figure out what I'm going to say as I'm talking. I create as I speak. She waits, she sits back until she feels like she has something to say. And what happens to her, she said, all her life is that people like me in the room, the extroverts, the loud ones, we never give her a chance to get to say anything. By the time she's finally decided something she has to say is worthwhile, the conversation has moved so far on because we all talk too quickly that she never gets to say anything. And if she does get a chance to say something, somebody like me interrupts her, cuts her off anyway. So what even is the point? And so what happened in that conversation is she explained to me why she was so frustrated by something that I thought was just like almost a compliment. It was a normal way of communicating. She understood that I didn't mean anything bad by it, that it's a normal way for me to speak, and I actually meant I was excited by what you just said. And we agreed, like in actual words, we made an agreement. That I was going to do my best not to cut her off as much as I could from then on, respecting how she feels as an introvert. I was going to do my very best, and she was going to be understanding and patient with me if I goofed that up sometimes, because that's how I'm used to being. And we've never had that problem again in our entire relationship. So that is, to me, a great example of we didn't agree, but we understood. And by understanding, we were able to make things better. And it means that when we do screw up, either of us in the future, we both remember that understanding. And so we're forgiving of each other because we have the shared foundation.
And Brian, it's phenomenal. And I'm glad you were able to do that. And that's where I try to get the couples, people in general, couples primarily, to get to that point. And how often are the perceptions maybe not accurate, and how they're delivered, the voice tone, let's face it, facial, the nonverbal aspects as well. And, you look at, it turns into that right or wrong, that tit for tat. No. Why are you mad at me? And, that's where I talk about questions of care and concern. I do it often, ask, why are you mad at me? Why, what did I do to hurt you? And it turns into, oh my God, they actually care what's going on with me. And all of a sudden that anger sort of dissipates, hopefully. And then you can talk about it because you're showing, again, that meaningful connection, that you actually care what that person is going through. And it could be based, I'm mad because oh no, that wasn't my intent. You get me? Like you, Brian, it wasn't your intent. Well, you're saying this now. It wasn't your intent to be rude or mean to the way I'm, but she took it that way. And oh my God, here we go again. And it blows up in that tit for tat, and it escalates. Because you're not paying attention to each other and trying to learn what each other's perception was. That doesn't mean you're right, she's wrong, or vice versa. It's a matter, you have a different perspective. That's okay. But can you learn from each other's perspective and go from there? And it's not a belittling. It's not a criticizing entity. It's more of, here's my side. This is what's going on. Now, what can we do with it if this happens again? And that's the big thing. And, with COVID, everybody's stressed. And Brian and I were talking before went live, dealing with, young kids and virtual learning, and I'm sure people listening can relate, going nuts, pulling their hair out type of thing. Trying to, you have a kindergartner trying to do virtual learning, and you're working from home, both working from home, and you get mama, dad, and my heart goes out to those people. Seriously, it's a lot of work. So it's very difficult to have that meaningful connection, because everything is so rapid fire right now, right? In the media, let's face it, social media, what we're on right now, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Well, actually, they should pay me to promote their stuff. But anyways, everything's rapid fire, but are we actually taking that breath, slowing our exhale to be able to say, man, I want to hear what you had to say? And it's hard to do with the hustle and bustle. And let's face it, the loneliness that we feel, we all want to have a voice, but are we actually listening to what the people in our lives have to say as well?
And if somebody's talking to you, there's a reason that they're talking to you. If somebody's telling you something, there's a reason that they're telling you. I feel like we forget that a lot, that we think that people are just talking to fill the noise. And you know what? Sometimes people are just talking to fill the noise. And what you have to ask yourself is, why is this person talking to fill the noise right now? What's going on behind the scenes that they feel the need to fill that silence all the time? Right? And if they're not just talking to fill the noise, the question is, why are they telling me this? There's a reason they told me that story that you thought was stupid and a waste of time. They didn't think it was a waste of time, or they wouldn't have told you. So what is it about what's going on in their mind, in their day, in their perspective, that made them want to take time out of their day to share that thing and to share it with you, right? Because again, connection is a gift. And when people tell you anything, it's an opportunity to build on a relationship instead of I recently was speaking, I was chatting with the folks over at Second City, which is all improv, and they were just we were talking all about yes and an improv skill, which is just such a life skill, because anytime you say no, and this is my friend Dr. Deborah Gilboa, she goes by Dr. G. She's a resilience expert and a family physician, and she talks about that fact that every time you say no, a no anywhere in life is immediate conversation ender. A no, it ends a conversation. It could end a relationship. And so anytime if you want to end a conversation, just say no, or some version of no to whatever the next thing is, and you will end it. But most of the time we don't mean to end conversations. We say no by instinct, or we say something negative by instinct. So anytime you can, it's a yes and. Even if you disagree with what somebody just said, you can say yeah, and then anything they just said that you could possibly agree with at all, and then build on it if you're going to respond. That's a constructive way to have a conversation, as opposed to a destructive.
Very much so. Now, if someone says, do you want a divorce? And you say yes, taking Brian's advice, right? Do you continue that conversation? I'm being a smart ass, and you look at those avenues, and you look at,
well, wait, hang on though. You were making a joke about that, Greg, but let's go back to that.
It's true though, right?
Because the answer is so the answer is, if the question is, do you want a divorce, and the answer is yes to that, you can still yes and that. You can decide to have a positive relationship post-divorce moving forward, as opposed to a destructive one. So that's, I know that was kind of a joke, but
but hopefully you're absolutely correct. Now, What do we do with it? And again, meaningful connection, it's very easy, like Brian and I, calm, cool, collected type of thing, or pretending to be. Do you look at those? But it's very difficult when, and let's face it, COVID, you've lost, I've known 9 people I lost because of COVID. And a lot of stuff going on as well. Other deaths I know, that have happened just in the last couple months, and with outside of COVID. But when you're going through traumas, you're going through heartache, you're going through, your world got turned upside down, job loss and all this stuff. It's very, very difficult to maintain that emotional intelligence and that emotional control to be able to listen and talk. We're not perfect. We're never going to be perfect. But even if we overtalk somebody, are we able to apologize? Even owning what we do, even though we didn't mean to, are we able to, own what we do? And we're human. And even owning what we do, that puts meaning to the person we're talking to. Huge. It means, you know what, we screwed up and we care about how that affected you. How many people are good at that? Or let's face it, can get better at that and improve at that just maybe a little bit, right?
Everyone, we can all improve, and I'm not some saint that's perfect at this all the time. In fact, the reason I got into this career, the reason that for me I made an entire career out of leading the human connection revolution as best as I can, is because I was so bad at it for so long, and it had such a devastating impact on my personal life and my professional life. It held me back in so many ways, and once I turned the corner and I kind of came out of the cave, to go back to the earlier philosophy conversation. Once you left, Plato's cave and you realize what's possible and how things can be so much better, a lot of people, authors write the book that they need to read. Preachers give the sermon they need to hear, speakers give the speech they need to hear. And so, I went into this field of human connection because I need a daily reminder about all this stuff. And what better way to remind myself every day than teaching it?
Doing it, right? And I love that. And it's the same thing with, being humble enough to look at, are we practicing what we preach? We're not human. We're very human. We're not perfect. And I tell people every day, I'm not perfect. You own that, but I have something that I can help you with, hopefully, and you go from that. And
that's why people trust you.
It's, well, hopefully, right? Fingers crossed, right?
Yeah.
Well as you, and I know you're busy. Brian, before we say goodbye, I want you to push your stuff out there where people can find your book, where people can find you, where people can maybe look to hire your services. Where can people find you all over the place? Even if they want to stalk you, there we go. Where can people find you?
Great. Appreciate it. So the easiest place to find everything is brianmillerspeaks.com. It's right there, brianmillerspeaks.com. You can connect with me all over the socials. I'm on LinkedIn more than anywhere else. I guess LinkedIn and YouTube. My book is called 3 New People. Make the most of your daily interactions and stop missing amazing opportunities. If you enjoyed anything I had to say today, this is the Bible on everything I just said today. So you can get this at 3newpeople.com or just find it on Amazon or whatever you like. So yeah, and I run a podcast. I do a lot of things. I have a weekly blog. I have a podcast where I talk to all the cool, famous people that wrote all the books in all of our libraries. Seth Godin, Shama Hyder, and Cal Fussman, and Julian Treasure, all the famous TED people. And
phenomenal.
It's real. Those are really cool conversations too on the podcast because, for what it's worth, what I do is I bring those people on not to talk about their latest project, but I bring them on to share stories of the connections in their lives, the relationships that led to their success. So a lot of times you get these famous people telling stories they've never told anywhere else because they have no reason to when they're doing their standard book tours and media tours. And it's a really fun. So the podcast is called Beyond Networking.
Awesome, Brian. I appreciate it. And like you said, people that get somewhere, it's the connections you make. Even people have found me, right? Found you through connections that we make, and they entrust their stories to us, their lives, their emotions. And, I know, speaking for myself, I'm very flattered. Never take that for granted. Very flattered that people do share their stories and their heartaches. It's big time.
Yeah.
So I preach, Brian, you've been awesome. Oh my God. Phenomenal. People, check out Brian big time. I'm going to ask him to share his links on Facebook and stuff underneath the episode, which would be great. And I'm going to say goodbye to Brian right now. Just hold on, Brian. And I appreciate you tuning in to the Art of Relationships show. You can catch me live every Wednesday, 12 noon Eastern time, right here on Facebook and as well on YouTube. You can also check the audio only versions all over the place. iHeart, SoundCloud, TuneIn, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Music, all over the place. Okay.